We talked in our last show about tensions heating up over Ukraine within the Republican Party, and it seems as though Mike Johnson has made a move here. Johnson gambles on plans separating Israel aid from Ukraine funds. So let's take a look from the Washington Post. After months of inaction, House Speaker Mike Johnson unveiled on Monday evening an outline of his plan to address the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, defying Republicans who threatened to oust him from the speakership if he moved forward with funding for Ukraine. But Johnson risks angering many of his members with a convoluted plan aiming to placate his critics on the right, while also giving national security hawks a chance to advance billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Johnson plans to put 4 different bills on the floor, essentially decoupling aid for Israel, which faced a barrage of missiles and drone threats from Iran over the weekend in retaliation for a deadly airstrike on its consulate in Syria, from help for Ukraine, which is more controversial inside his conference. The Speaker will then advance separate votes for aid to Taiwan and a measure to satisfy Republican foreign policy demands, including the seizure of Russian assets and a House-approved bill that could ban TikTok from the United States, among other measures. A draft of Johnson's plan mirrors the Senate bill, according to 5 people familiar with numbers, but may not include humanitarian assistance mainly directed toward Gaza. Neither Johnson nor his office immediately commented on the draft. According to a person familiar with the plan, Johnson gave Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer a heads up about the new strategy. The Speaker told reporters that he would talk with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about the path forward. Nowhere in the bills are border security measures demanded by some House Republicans as a condition of approving aid to foreign countries. The omission was glaring in the eyes of some far-right lawmakers. Don't forget, they've already threatened to file a motion to vacate over this, and he's basically daring them to do this here. Every member ultimately will be able to vote their own conscience on all of these matters, and everybody will have the opportunity to weigh in, Johnson said after a GOP conference meeting Monday. I think the final product will be something that everybody can take confidence in because they got to vote their district. It's a major gamble by the embattled Johnson, who was elevated to lead the fractious GOP conference after the unprecedented ouster of Speaker Kevin McCarthy. The formerly low-profile lawmaker has had trouble rallying a majority of his conference on almost anything and has had to rely on Democrats on substantive issues, including keeping the government open. Nonetheless, Johnson intends to try and pass the measure through regular order to appease his conference, requiring a simple majority for approval, a difficult feat that will need the support of almost every Republican, given the slim 2-vote GOP majority. I think the Speaker's doing the right thing. The Speaker is saying, regardless of who calls for my motion to vacate, I need to do the right thing by my conference, and he's doing that, said Representative Kevin Hern, a Republican from Oklahoma, who chairs the largest faction of conservatives in the House. Marjorie Taylor Greene has been threatening to introduce a measure intended to oust Johnson from the speakership, known as a motion to vacate, if he puts Ukraine aid on the floor. Now, here's where it looked like she may have blinked and he may have gotten the better of this deal. Greene labeled Johnson's plan a scam and said she is firmly against it, but hasn't said yet whether she will move to try to depose him. So this article was from yesterday. Quote, I support the majority and I want it next time, so I'm being careful, she said. He's definitely not going to be Speaker next Congress if we're lucky enough to have the majority. So that sounds like a bit of a cop-out. Sounds like she's saying, yeah, I don't like this. I'm not going to vote for this, but we're not going to try to bounce him in the middle of an election year.
Right.
We'll just get rid of him next time when the vote comes around in the next session. In response, Johnson said, I don't spend my time worrying about motions to vacate. We're having to govern here, and we're going to do our job. I don't know how that shakes out. So it sounded at the time that this came out that Marjorie Taylor Greene was unhappy, but that she was going to give him the proverbial pass. That, however, did not last long. More on that in a second. At Monday's meeting, talk turned to border security. Representative Matt Gaetz suggested passing a rule to instruct the Senate to take up a partisan measure that House Republicans approved last year, known as H.R. 2, that severely restricted migrant entry into the United States before bringing up any House-passed national security package, according to two lawmakers in the room. Representative Ralph Norman said Johnson was in listening mode and said nothing to those suggestions. I hate this, that Johnson's saying it and not following through with it, that the hill to die on was the border, and he would not put Ukraine up without the border. Looks like that's going down the tube. So in other words, they have a measure that they were going to put in place saying you cannot pass any foreign aid until you adopt these border measures. But that doesn't seem to be on the table. So in response, Marjorie Taylor Greene had a bit of a rough day today. So these tweets are from early this morning, one very early this morning, one later on. No, I am not voting for the rule on Johnson's bundle of funding for billions more to Ukraine and other foreign wars. When Joe Biden signs H.R. 2 into law and Schumer holds the Mayorkas impeachment trial in the Senate, I will agree to vote for the rule only. The United States Congress swore an oath to America and Americans, and our country is under a daily deadly invasion, and the cartels are at war against our country. The Biden admin is giving aid and comfort to them. Speaker Johnson is not holding Democrats accountable nor leading our Republican majority. He's actually giving in to Democrats' every demand, and he's using dirty swamp tactics to push through America Last agenda. It's time to stand for America. Still at that point, consistent with the Washington Post report, objections to what's going on, but not saying she's willing to file a motion to vacate. Well, just 3 hours later, here's Marjorie Taylor Greene again. Speaker Mike Johnson had thrown our GOP conference into chaos by serving the Democrats and passing Biden's agenda. Last week, Speaker Johnson shoved warrantless spying on Americans down our throats with FISA. Now Speaker Johnson is going to fund foreign wars while refusing to force Schumer to hold the trial to impeach Mayorkas and demanding Joe Biden sign H.R. 2 into law. Speaker Johnson must announce a resignation date and allow Republicans to elect a new speaker to put America first and pass a Republican agenda. Thank you to Representative Thomas Massey for co-sponsoring my motion to vacate. It's time for a new speaker. So her leash was pretty short, didn't last really 24 hours between the Washington Post saying, yeah, she's upset, but she'll take the L until January, basically, of next year. And like I said, less than a full 24 hours later, she is filing a motion to vacate. So he dared them to come for him by doing this, and it looks like they are coming for him. So that's where it stands now. So risky, if you want to call it risky, but he basically fell on his sword here, it looks like, as now smart money is that there's going to be a motion to vacate.
Okay, he is, politically speaking, I'm not talking about what policies I want to see enacted, just in terms of the mahjong game that is politics, there's no winning play here. I don't even know why anybody would want this job.
No.
Okay, so on the one hand, you want to prove that Republicans can govern. And on the other hand, you do have this Freedom Caucus that, unless you do what they want, is going to make it impossible for you to pass any legislation. And aside from that, even if you give in to their demands, you're going to lose all the normies. So
right.
How do you even do this job? How can he possibly pass anything?
Now his only move
I
here,
think his gambit was not a bad one from that perspective. Like, hey, so now you give the Freedom Caucus the opportunity to make their statement on every part of this bill, but they're not going for it, man. They're not going for it. If only we had a Marjorie Taylor Greene on the left, what we could accomplish.
Well, because they know that there are enough Democrats to pass these things. And that's why the Freedom Caucus's take this whole time is that he's selling out the Republican base to the Democratic Party, because the Uniparty and the bipartisan War Machine Party is going to sign off on each, and you know they're just going to sign off one after the next, and there's nothing that this insurgent group can really do at the end of the day when the uniparty teams up, which is why, like, yes, obviously, the right move during Force the Vote was to do it and sow this kind of chaos within the Democratic Party that we're now seeing sown within the GOP. That's obviously the right thing to do from that standpoint at that moment. But ultimately, the lesson of all this is that this is why you have to be, at the end of the day, post-duopoly. Because at the end of the day,
Right.
even if you do push enough insurgent candidates up that hill and get them into the office, and even if they do hold up their end of the bargain and say, we are going to be total ball busters to hold up progress until progress is done on our terms, there's enough uniparty consensus around these major issues where they could, at the end of the day, just jump over you. And that seems to be what's happening now, is that, yes, for all the fight that these Freedom Caucus members put up, and no one can deny that they've pretty much held up their end of the bargain to their base and put up the best fight they could, they're outnumbered by establishment candidates in both parties. And that's their main gripe here, is that you're choosing the Democratic neocons over the populist anti-war GOPers at the rank and file level. And, look, they got a right to be upset about that. Doesn't look like there's much they can do. The smartest move for Johnson to make there, because if you notice at the end of that article, where was it? Was it in the article or was it in the tweet? Something about, I forget where it was, but something about he has to either offer a resignation date or else we're going to have this out now. If Johnson says, all right, fine, I'll resign November 6th, whatever, to get us through the cycle in one piece, and then I promise to be out, that's probably the best move he can make right now. Will he do it? I mean, maybe, maybe not. He never struck me as a guy who particularly wanted the job anyway. He was just kind of thrust into it after their whole Force the Vote thing fell apart. Yeah, so maybe that's the best move.
Yeah, they just scraped the bottom of the barrel.
Please clap.